Margaret Preston with Over Parkinsons, and today we get to expand on our POP profile series with a new chapter. We have David Kemp with Cure PSP, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the organization and its mission, and we are just going to run through some good questions and get started now. So David, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Margaret. Thank you for having me this morning. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we do.
It's our pleasure. And some of our listeners may know we've partnered in the past a couple of times. So this is just another extension of our relationship, and we're excited to get started on this.
We have, and we're happy to work with you.
Very good. So tell us, David, tell our listeners your position at Cure PSP and how long you've been with the organization.
Sure, happy to. Well, this is not a typical career trajectory, I guess. I was asked about 5.5 years ago, beginning of 2015, by a good friend of mine and classmate, Everett Cook, who's on our board of directors. His wife, unfortunately, whom I knew very well, I knew when they were actually dating back in the day, passed away from cortical basal degeneration, or CBD, which is a disease related to PSP, at age 61. And she was a dynamic woman, Wall Street titan, 2 children, community activist, etc. And I saw her decline and how terrible it was. And Everett asked me to come on board to sort of revitalize the foundation, to try to expand it and grow it. So it was kind of a second or third or fourth career for me. I had been in the past in primarily marketing, branding, public relations. So essentially a marketing guy at heart. Mm-hmm. So I had sort of skin in the game, if you can put it that way, in terms of coming on board. It was really a mission as much as a job.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit, give me a quick synopsis of Cure PSP's mission. Tell folks what you all strive to do at Cure PSP.
Absolutely, Margaret. So Cure PSP focuses on what we call prime of life neurodegeneration. And this is a spectrum of relatively rare diseases that, unlike, say, Alzheimer's disease, tend to strike younger in life. Mm-hmm. They're diseases like PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy, and several others that have related symptomatically and related pathologically. Our primary focus has been historically PSP and CBD, cortical basal degeneration, an even rarer related diseases. Mm-hmm. We have 3 areas of our practice. We call them care, consciousness, and cure. Just that I always have to have something that is sticky, if you will.
It is.
Care, we provide programs, advocacy support for patients and families. These are diseases, as you know, that currently have no cure and even no real effective treatment, but we do support patients and families and caregivers through various programs. Consciousness is really creating awareness of these diseases, especially with doctors and allied healthcare professionals. Doctors, even neurologists, are not, because they're rare diseases, are not familiar with them. And in fact, so diagnosis is very often incorrect. And in fact, Parkinson's disease is often the initial diagnosis. And then historically, people haven't been diagnosed often until close to death, quite frankly. And then autopsy diagnosis is different in any event. And then cure is really funding research. And we do this through what we call venture grants. And these are grants of usually $100,000 to early career investigators. We see them as kind of seed funding for great new ideas. And if they're successful, they can go on and get maybe bigger money from the NIH or other sources. So that's our essential focus. And we're so broad mission focused around those 3 areas.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't see anything more important or such a driving force to know that folks aren't getting diagnosed with PSP until close to death. That in and of itself is probably such a driving force to say we can do better, and we can get these diagnoses earlier.
Well, that's exactly right, Margaret. And I've seen, even in the fairly short period of 5 years, I've seen improvement in that. And I've seen people, which interestingly has sort of affected our donor base, because people now come to us earlier because they get an earlier diagnosis. So we've been able to increase our donor base through that.
Yeah, kind of one feeds the other. Well, tell us, as the president of Cure PSP, tell us what a typical day would look like. Of course, I should preface this maybe a pre-COVID question. So what would a typical day look like? Maybe without all the Zooms and the virtual calls, but what's a typical day for the president of Cure PSP?
Well, sure, Margaret, that's a great question. I always say my top three jobs are fundraising, fundraising, and fundraising.
Okay.
So I spend a whole lot of my time working with donors, especially our higher end donors. I keep them apprised, usually now by the old fashioned telephone call, because I can't go see them and have lunch with them anymore.
Right.
What's going on in the foundation? They often will fund research, which we will name. For example, if they fund $100,000 project, we'll name it in honor or memory of their loved one, and so keep them apprised of that. I also spend a lot of time writing personal handwritten notes to anybody who's given $500 or more, which for us, $500 is a bigger donation.
Yeah.
And I've written thousands and thousands of these notes to where I have, I think, just perennial writer's cramp at this point. But it's a basic technique, and it really helps us. Beyond that, I have a really good staff, really sharp staff. So I provide overall strategic direction, ideas for tactical execution, feedback, but I let them kind of run with it. And I've tried to create within Cure PSP what I'd call a culture of experimentation, where I encourage people to try new things. And, you learn as much from your failures as you do from your successes. So there's not that sort of fear factor that, if you fail, you're going to lose your job. I want to have people try new things. And I think this has helped us as we've moved into this new virtual environment.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the usual business matters of accounting and the audit and managing investments, that sort of thing that I do get involved with. So that's kind of, it would be a mixed bag of those things.
Yeah, I can attest to your staff that you noted. They are phenomenal, and they certainly are thinking outside the box, and just in our interactions and time trying to think how we can partner together. So you do have a wonderful healthy risk-taking staff. So I can attest to that. You've kind of dovetailed into our next question. I would certainly be remiss not to talk about COVID and the times right now. So I was hoping you can expand a little bit about how Cure PSP has really adapted to these times and entered this virtual world, and talk to me a little bit about how you've had to adjust during these times and remain resourceful and supportive and tackle that acronym that you had shared earlier.
Well, absolutely, Margaret. This has obviously affected everybody. So back in March, I pulled the plug and we all went home.
Yeah.
Since then, we've been primarily working remotely at home. We do maintain office space in a co-working environment, but we've reduced that office footprint. We've been able to save money on office space because I think people will be working at home for some period of time, and they're given that choice. There's no requirement to come to the office or expectation. So I think certain jobs may remain remote for a long time, if not forever. It's sort of a different way. So this is probably no different than most other organizations have had to adapt. Obviously, in terms of how we communicate to the outside world, that's completely changed. So, for example, we have 70 to 80 volunteer support groups that have met in person with patients and families, provide support. Many of those have moved online, and many of the support group leaders have, with our help, have adopted Zoom, gotten very skilled at it, where they resisted it in the past. Now
Of course.
they're experts at it.
Yeah.
So we're encouraging that. We do an online virtual office hour with our patient and care partner advocacy team for volunteers, where they can be updated on where things are going.
Mhm.
We do now national support groups. We have a men's group and a women's group, which has become very popular,
Yeah.
where the people can share their views on a national basis. So in a way, the virtual platform gives us an opportunity where you don't have to be physically there, but you can
Sure.
spread out.
Yeah.
We're continuing to do volunteer fundraising events, which have been big, major sources of revenue, certainly significant sources in the past.
Mhm.
We did one called Sundays. That's the ice cream sundae to
Okay.
stop Cure PSP.
Uh-huh.
Virtually, we're doing something called Bonelli's Music Bash. So,
Okay.
a lot of them are not being done, but a lot of them, with our help, have gone virtual.
Right.
One thing we're doing, I believe strongly in outside partnerships with experts, bringing in experts where we can.
Mhm.
We're working on a contract basis with a group called Wizard Studios in Brooklyn, and they specialize in doing virtual events.
Okay.
So, for example, we have 3 major virtual events coming up. One is our annual research symposium that attracts scientists from all over the globe.
Mhm.
We also have our family conference, which in the past would have been in person, not
Mhm.
now.
Right.
And we also have our 30th anniversary celebration in December. Tony DeCopel from CBS News this morning is our MC, which
Okay.
is really nice.
Yeah.
So it's been, kind of a brave new world here. But again, I'd like to seek outside help. And Wizard has been, among other things, working on the Biden campaign, and so they're the real deal. So
Right.
they've been very helpful in enabling us to pivot to this new world.
Mhm.
And I do, of course, we have our weekly staff meeting on Zoom and keep everybody apprised of what's going on. And I think because we've been financially solid, we haven't had to furlough anybody. People
Right.
have, I think, had confidence they're going to keep their jobs.
Mhm.
And so no, I think, nobody's going anywhere now. So we have a good, solid staff to work with consistency.
That's wonderful. And you touched on something that certainly is the positive aspect of this, in that while your events aren't in person, you're able to reach exponentially more people because they are virtual. So your reach is probably a little bit larger with that. So it's kind of the silver lining of this. So I appreciate that comment, because there is a benefit to some of these aspects.
It's a good point, Margaret. It is a little bit unexpected consequence of suddenly having a national audience for
Hmm.
a support group, for
Sure.
example.
Oh yeah, it's,
Yeah.
it's great. Well, tell me, folks with PD, folks with PSP, these prime of life diseases, tell me what your recommendations, or what would be some just powerful tidbits you can give those folks who are at home right now, because it is hard having that neurodegenerative disease at home, hesitant to go out. So what would be your advice for this population, this community?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a hard question because, of course, people with movement disorders, especially, I think PD, you can probably stay more functional for a longer period of time than you can, say, with PSP, which is rapidly progressive, leading to confinement to a wheelchair, inability to speak, uh,
Hmm.
eventually, so it's average time from onset to death is about 7 years with PSP.
Okay.
But what we can encourage people to do is certainly to stay active. There are, as you know very well, we admit there are no real treatments.
Yeah.
It's incurable, and there are no
Yeah.
real good treatments. One of the things you try is levodopa, which works on PD, but if it's not working, it's one indication it's probably PSP. So anyway, keeping active, really, really important. We actually are starting now a new program through our channel, which we call Cure PSP TV, and it's
Okay.
not Netflix yet, but
Which
it's a
you're approaching that level, I
it's
know.
a channel. Yes, well, we hope so. It's a channel offering content, and we're starting something called Wellness Wednesday.
Yeah.
And this was an idea from Denise Ferrero, who's our social media manager, and they said, "Sounds like a good idea. Let's run with it." So she's putting it together with programming so people can do what they can do, which is getting up, some yoga, some things that it's possible to do. So staying active to the extent you can is really one of the best things you can do.
Yeah.
Staying engaged with people, which again is obviously now has to be at a virtual level.
Mhm.
But interestingly, I think we've heard that people have found it easier to stay engaged in a way in this environment because you don't need to get somewhere physically. You can engage on Zoom, and people maybe not friends and associates are not confronted with sometimes disturbing symptoms of PSP and related diseases. It can often be, quite frankly, off-putting, for others when they see these symptoms because they are so dramatic
Right.
that it drives away. Your social networks tend to start to dissolve, and so it may be easier in some ways to keep connected
Mhm.
to virtual platforms.
I think you touched on something so important that we at Over Parkinsons, I know you all are doing at Cure PSP, creating these events or these support groups for people like you. So you do sometimes lose the non disease person because the symptoms are obvious, hard to manage via conversation. So creating these safe environments where, for instance, in our organization, we have the Parkinson's Activity League, creating these movement days where people can get out and bowl, go to the driving range just with people like themselves is so important because you establish that community and there shouldn't be, but there's no embarrassment, no self-consciousness. You kind of eliminate that. And I know you all are striving to do that through the support groups, et cetera. So I just wanted to highlight what you noted. I think that's so important from
Yes,
a social aspect. And
absolutely.
socialization is still so imperative to all these things.
That's right. Again, sort of unintended consequences we couldn't
Yeah.
have predicted, but if you think about it, it perhaps makes outreach easier
Mhm.
in certain ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for touching on that. So now let's move away from COVID. I think
Mhm.
everyone can appreciate that sentiment. So we'll move away from that. Tell me, we've all learned lessons from this wonderful community we all work in. Tell us what lessons you've learned when working with people with a prime of life disease.
Sure. Well, I think, lessons are somewhat sort of psychological. The persistence or the power of hope
Hmm.
has been a big thing to me, that people, even though they know when they get the diagnosis, they know it's incurable. I mean, and doctors don't always have the best bedside manner, so
Right.
it
Right.
can often be a fairly abrupt message that they get. Yeah,
Yeah. In
you
in
got
a
it.
very impersonal exam room. So it's all, there's so many aspects that aren't positive when you have that diagnosis.
So you got the disease, it's incurable, next patient, please.
Yes.
Um, I hate to say it, but we hear this all the time. So the persistence of hope, people know that it's incurable, but they continue to fight it and
Yeah.
to remain active, and talking to um, one gentleman whose wife has been diagnosed, and some of it, the symptoms can be sort of impulsive. One of the symptoms is impulsive behavior. You don't think before you do something. And she's an equestrian and active, and he said, yeah, she just insisted I'm going to go out and show you how I can get a horse on my horse trailer.
Hmm.
And she fell and hurt herself, and
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
they're fighting against this until the very end. And I've also been with people who are in the last stages, confined to a wheelchair, can't speak, but they're still clearly aware of, they get all their marbles. They're aware of what's going on around them. There's hand signals, they're connected, and they're still smiling and laughing,
Hmm.
I don't know what that is, but
Yeah.
it's remarkable, that level of persistence and hope and
Hmm.
fighting against something that they know is going to take them
Yeah. Yeah.
eventually.
We certainly see that in our community of folks with PD. So it is remarkable, and it's something that we can all learn from and apply in the smaller aspects in our own lives. So thanks for sharing that. Um, what's been the hardest part about working with folks and just basically working in this arena? Have there been barriers? Is it, I'm sure that at times it's emotionally draining. Tell us kind of some of the challenges you face working in this arena with the prime of life diseases.
Sure. Well, on an emotional level, absolutely. I think it's hard on everybody because, we get calls often the day of diagnosis, or the day after
Mhm.
diagnosis, we're the next call that people make.
Yeah.
And all our people are really uh, able and trained to essentially spend time with these people on the phone and talk them off the cliff. You can't give them you can't say, well, you take this drug or
Yeah.
do this or do that. I mean, nothing you can tell them really that they don't know, but you try to talk them off the cliff. You make them acquainted with our services. You keep in touch. So I think we're a little different than sort of a bigger organization where, people call us and they get somebody who can really talk with them empathetically. And I encourage people, if you're going to talk to them for an hour, fine. It's an hour well spent. So you're
Yeah.
not being a receptionist, or you're not getting somebody who can't really help you, because we are small. So I think constantly hearing those stories is probably hard on everybody, and I stay close to donors. I've made friends and acquaintances. I only use my cell phone. That's when so I'm available, essentially 24/7. And, I had one donor, husband, call me the night his wife died. He wanted, like, I was the first call he
Yeah.
made, let me know his wife died, and things like that are, I think, emotionally become very hard. I think of the news anchor in the morning news has to continually report
Mhm.
bad news. How does that affect you?
Right.
I think, on a practical level, fundraising for essentially a rare disease is difficult, challenging.
Sure.
We say 20,000 PSP patients, maybe 3,000 CBD patients. So you're dealing with a smaller donor population, which restricts the amount of money you can raise. One of our challenges is to try to expand into some of the related diseases and expand our donor base.
Mhm.
And that being said, we're doing well financially. We've got good reserves, so we're in good shape. But
Yeah.
as a practical matter, if you're Alzheimer's disease with 6 million patients in the U.S., then you have a much broader
Yeah.
population to raise money from.
Yeah. It draws the donor pool becomes larger. Sure.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
I wanted to touch on the emotional piece that you highlighted. It almost sounds like Cure PSP is the go-to outlet, which, like you said, could be draining, but it's also the positive in all this, and that folks are calling you upon diagnosis, upon maybe someone has passed away, but at least you all have provided that indispensable outlet for folks in this world. So that's something that struck me that you said, and I think it's a good takeaway for our listeners.
Yes, I think that's absolutely correct, Margaret, through both staff and our network of active board members and volunteers who provide this support.
Yeah, definitely. Well, tell me, where would you like to see Cure PSP go in the next few years? Where do you see it going? What are some pie in the sky ideas? Where would you like to see it go in the next couple of years?
Sure. Well, that's a great question and something we're always grappling with. I think certainly our mission is going to stay consistent. This notion of care, consciousness, cure. We're not going to move away from any one of those. So, on a practical level, as I mentioned, expanding our donor base
Mhm.
is certainly something we'd like to do, because the more money we have, the more good we can do.
Yes. Yes.
There are some practical things that we are in the midst of engaging with. One of them is our Centers of Care program, where I guess it's almost like a, AAA 4 Diamond award to a hotel. We
Yeah.
evaluate facilities and their ability to care for these patients, and then we designate them as centers of care.
Mhm.
So we're expanding, in the process of expanding, from about 25 to 40 of these. So we see those as being kind of linchpins of awareness and care, where people know that they can go to get the state of the art care for the condition. That's
Mhm.
certainly one of them. Another area that we're doing is expanding globally through something called Promotus, which is a network that's been created along with PSPA, which is our counterpart in the UK, and really the only other sort of professionally staffed organization in PSP in the world. But it's an organization of largely volunteer groups in various countries. So we're working to translate our key materials into different languages. We've already done Spanish. We're working on Portuguese, French, Hindi, Arabic. So
Yeah.
we feel an opportunity. While I don't know that this will expand a donor base, at least it will help us to reach out.
Mhm.
You can presume the incidence, is similar
Mhm.
in India and China as it is in the U.S. So certainly that global extension would be important. We want to expand our, we call it the Sherry Levian Quality of Life Fund, in memory of a woman who passed, where we provide direct grants for in-home care, professional in-home care.
Okay.
So people require 24/7 care, often has to be provided by family members,
Right.
because people don't have the resources to hire on their own this care. So we provide grants, we pay the caregiving companies, professionals, directly for the care provided. So that's an almost infinite, we could almost expand that infinitely.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
much money, it's like the need is endless, put it that way.
Right. Right.
So
It's fantastic.
those are some of the things that we're trying to do, and certainly expanding our venture grants program, giving more grants. Our applications for grants have expanded, and so we'd like to give more of those. So again, it kind of all depends, as with any organization, on resources. We're
Yeah.
in
Of course.
good shape now and can do a lot. So
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's a good mix of what you see in the next few years will be a good mix of helping folks today in the here and now, which we certainly value at POP, but also looking to the future and what are some things you can do in the future. So that kind of dovetails into the next question I had regarding research and looking into the future. I know one of your prongs is certainly, one of those arms is research, and you guys have funded an array of research efforts since you've been founded in 1990. But talk to me a little bit about what you think is the most exciting. There's an array of research being done, but what do you think is the most exciting part, the research that's happening in the prime of life disease arena? So tell me about what you think is the most exciting thing, and with that excitement provides that hope that people kind of hold on to. So talk to me a little bit about the research.
sure. Well, Margaret, that's a great question. And first of all, I offer the caveat that I'm not a scientist. But I
Well, you
certainly,
sound like one, so I wouldn't
well, I'm
communicate that you're not.
I'm not a PhD nor
Right.
am an MD, but
Yeah.
from my perspective, in even the fairly short period of 5 years, there's been a lot more interest in research into PSP in particular, because the science is showing that it's actually a gateway disease to solving big problems like Alzheimer's disease and PD as well, which both, of course, affect a lot more people. But for various scientific reasons. The tau protein is a key factor in all these diseases.
Mhm.
Research, PSP has become kind of a gateway disease for research. So I think when I started, I felt, well, it was kind of a rare disease career dead end for a talented scientist. You know,
Mhm.
they didn't
Mhm.
want to go, they wanted, something bigger like curing cancer or heart disease. So, but now that's changed. And so what that's meant is we get a lot more applications for funding. We get a lot of talent, research talent put against it. And maybe most important is pharma companies are broadly interested in clinical trials. Now, a lot of these, of course, have been sidelined because of COVID, but they will continue into bringing drugs to market. And they're publicly held companies. They don't see an opportunity in 20,000 PSP patients, but if they find the Alzheimer's drug, then
Right.
they've hit a home run. So I think there's connected trends of both basic research interest and drug development are the things I see
Mhm.
most notable in this area. And, there's some 7,000 rare diseases, and most of them don't get much attention. So I think we've been fortunate in that respect.
Yeah, well said. And I have one final question for you before we wrap it up. Tell me a little bit about what you think would be the most important takeaway that folks who are listening can take away and can move on from knowing a little bit more about Cure PSP. What would be one thing that you'd like them to really take away from this?
Well, sure. It's a great question, and sort of always hard when you have to boil it down to that thought. But
I'm
I think
asking for the nuts and bolts, right? And it's hard, I
for
know.
us, I think it's that we provide advocacy, care, and most important, hope for people with these prime of life neurodegenerative diseases.
Mhm.
I think that element of hope is persistent. We don't have the cure, but we're working on it,
Mhm.
and with more attention, it will happen. So to me, that's what I'd like people to think of Cure PSP as kind of a port in the storm, a place they can go
Yeah.
with some support, some advocacy, and at least provide hope that we will find a solution and we can go out of business or
Yeah.
move on to some other problem.
Yeah. Port in a storm. I like that. That's a fantastic quote. And I hope folks can take that away. So tell them where they can find more about Cure PSP.
Sure. Well, the best way is to go to what I think is our terrific website, curepsp.org.
Mhm.
And that's really going to be your font of information. You can, certainly donate there if you would like to, but beyond that, it's just a rich source of support. So I would go right there first
Okay.
for any information on us. And also I'm happy to take calls. As I always tell people, give me a call. Best way to reach me,
Yeah.
802-734-1185. Give me a call.
So the president of Cure PSP has just provided his number. So I think if nothing else, that's a fantastic takeaway and a good way to end it. David, thank you so much for being the next chapter of our POP profile series. And we're excited to get this out to folks.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for the
Thanks, Dave.
opportunity.
Okay.